Well, hello everyone. Hope everyone had a good morning and thank you for joining us today. A few notes before we begin the CoCoRaHS Informational. This is an extension presentation, so I must tell you that the bathrooms are somewhere in your location. I'll leave it on you to find them, and the refreshments are in your refrigerator. Thank you for sponsoring the refreshments for this particular extension meeting. With that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to our Indiana State climatologist, Beth Hall.
Hi, thanks, Hans. I'm Beth Hall. I'm the relatively new Indiana State climatologist. I started just a little over a year ago in the position. Really happy to be back in Indiana and to be a part of the coordination team for the state CoCoRaHS program. So the presentation today, we originally were going to have this be an introduction that provided an overview of what CoCoRaHS is so people have a better understanding of what the program is, if they want to join, how they can better promote this with neighbors and friends and the circles that you all travel in. Then we were going to open it up for Q&A and then follow that with a training session. However, we decided it might be better if we break this up into two separate webinars. So the one today, which is the same duplicate as the one that was offered last night, is just the introduction and overview of what the program will be. Sam Lashley will be giving that presentation in a matter of minutes. And then on May 7th, we will offer a similar like webinar online training session. There'll be two of them, I think at 1 p.m. in the afternoon and maybe 6 p.m. Eastern, so back up an hour if you're in the central time zones. And that way you can get more of the training. So also in that time between now and May 7th, if you are interested in joining, signing up online and ordering your rain gauge, that would be perfect. So let me see here. I'm now going to hand it over to Sam. Sam is the new warning coordination meteorologist at the National Weather Service office in Indianapolis. He's not in any way new to the National Weather Service. He actually came from the Northern Indiana office, and he's not at all new to CoCoRaHS. He's been part of the Indiana CoCoRaHS since the very beginning. So who better than to have an expert in these topics give the presentation? So go for it, Sam.
All right, thank you, Beth. Appreciate that. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. We did kind of do one of these run-throughs last evening, and if you were on for that, like Hans said, this will be a repeat, but I never give the same talk twice, so you might learn something different if you stick around. I'm also looking forward to the refreshments this morning. I do have donuts here for anybody that is in the area and wants to come by, Jack's Donuts. But in all seriousness, thanks for joining us. And this will probably take 30-35 minutes to get through, and then we'll have time for question and answers at the end. So again, this is just going to be an introduction to CoCoRaHS, the Citizen Science Program. And we're going to talk a lot about partnerships today and how the National Weather Service, CoCoRaHS, and the Indiana State Climate Office, Purdue Extension, just how we're all working together to improve data collection for precipitation across the state, and just how valuable CoCoRaHS is. We're going to talk a lot about that today. So without further ado, we'll go on to the first slide here. And I just want to briefly mention the Indiana State Climate Office and Dr. Beth Hall there in the picture. And she has several people working there with her, Jonathan Weaver, and then Hans and Austin Pearson with Purdue Extension. And again, it's been a great partnership. Beth, thank you for everything you've done for CoCoRaHS and promoting this program. I've been involved with CoCoRaHS since it started in Indiana way back around 2004 to 2005. And just the value of the observations to the National Weather Service and to the Indiana climate as a whole is invaluable. So thanks to Beth's office, that data is stored. I know she and her staff's working on a lot of tools where we can dive into the data more in depth, do a lot of research and things like that. So if you haven't been to the state Climate Office website. I strongly recommend you check it out. Just Google IN Climate, Indiana Climate, or Indiana State Climate Office, and it'll pop right up in your search there. So with that, we'll go on to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about the National Weather Service. And we have 122 offices that serve the entire United States and territories, and 6 of those offices actually serve Indiana. So you see Chicago kind of covers the northwest part of the state, the northern Indiana office, the northern part, and then Indianapolis covers much of central and south central Indiana. The Wilmington, Ohio office, based out of Cincinnati, covers that southeast part of the state. And then Louisville and Paducah cover the south and the southwest. So if you ever have any questions about weather or CoCoRaHS or anything, those are the contact points there for each office. Those are my counterparts, warning coordination meteorologists. And our job is to handle outreach, do training like this, spotter talks. Unfortunately, those got canceled, but we will be having some online recorded spotter training if you're looking for more weather information after this. So basically, each office that serves Indiana has roughly the same number of people, give or take a few people, but about 23 people. We staff the office 24/7, 365 days a year, and we're always there to answer questions and put the forecast out and monitor for any kind of weather that develops. So it's a fun job, it's an interesting job, but again, CoCoRaHS has become a big part of how we do our job, and it actually helps with our mission of protection of life and property. And again, we'll talk about that coming up. So moving on to the next slide, CoCoRaHS, it started over 20 years ago as a grassroots effort to collect precipitation data. So back in 1998, there was a big heavy rain event up in the mountains outside of Fort Collins, Colorado. And nobody really knew how much rain was falling up there. Radar doesn't work too well in the mountains. And all of a sudden, water just came rushing down the mountains into Fort Collins, and just a massive, massive flood, a lot of devastation. You can look that up on Google or YouTube and see some pretty incredible videos. But after that was said and done, the state climatologist went up to talk to people up in the higher terrain and found out that, people they knew a lot of rain was falling, but they didn't know who to call or how to report it or even how to measure it. So he started collecting data from these people. He started handing out rain gauges, gave these people a way to easily report on a daily basis. And then those people told people, and they wanted to do it. And this just quickly expanded across Colorado and then neighboring states. And then eventually, in about a 4 to 5 year period, it had spread across much of the United States. So as I mentioned, it started here in Indiana the first observation was back in 2004 up in Porter County. But it really wasn't until late 2005 and especially 2006 where we started doing more training, and things really took off across the state and has been going strong ever since. We still have several observers who are taking observations today that first took their observation back in 2006. So that's fantastic. So now there's over 20,000 volunteers of all ages and backgrounds across the United States taking these measurements, and it continues to grow and expand. But unfortunately, for every 4 observers we sign up, only about 1 observer sticks around for more than a year. So we want to recruit new observers, but we also want to work to maintain the observers that we have and keep them engaged. And that's part of what we're doing today with this educational webinar, and hoping you will help us spread the word and become an observer as well. So because of this, CoCoRaHS has become the largest source of daily precipitation measurements in the United States, and also across Canada, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and the Bahamas. So it's a very large international network now, and it's strictly a nonprofit volunteer network, which is pretty cool. So it's citizen science at its best. So we'll go on to the next slide here and talk about, are the observations really important? Well, here's just a handful of groups and organizations that use this data. Obviously, I talked about the National Weather Service and state climatologists, but FEMA has recognized CoCoRaHS observers as trained observers and official measurements for declaring disaster declarations. So when there's a big heavy rain and flood event, such as February 2018 in Indiana, or a big snow event with record snowfall, we will collect CoCoRaHS observations, submit them to FEMA, and then they determine if any funding for disaster comes out of that. So very important role that these volunteers play in CoCoRaHS. Local television meteorologists love the data. They love showing CoCoRaHS reports on air. So, you know, sometimes you might see your station show up there for local TV stations using it. And just, you know, so many more groups on there. Research and scientists, we're going to talk about that later in the show. And just a lot of good uses for this data. So on to the next slide, please. And I'm having a little slow down on my computer system here. I apologize. Okay, so precipitation and snowfall measurements are easy to take. We ask you take one per day, sometime between 5 and 10 in the morning, and it doesn't have to be at the exact same time. I used to work rotating shift work, so if I was on day shifts, I'd take my observation at 6 in the morning. If I was coming off a midnight shift, I would usually take it around 7:30 or 8 in the morning when I got home. So we're very flexible with that. If you go on vacation, that's fine. You don't have to take a measurement every day. We have other options in place for the period you're gone, how to report that on a multi-day report. So it's a very flexible, easy program to participate in. And we say it only takes 5 minutes a day, but honestly, on most days, it doesn't even take that. And it's so easy that even a bear can do it. So you can see there, we get some very interesting pictures. One neat thing about CoCoRaHS is you can enter anything you want in the notes section of your observation. So we have a lot of people that comment on, you know, wildlife they see out by the rain gauge. And sometimes people say, well, I couldn't take the observation today because I had a bear next to my rain gauge. And there's proof of it in that picture. I mentioned all ages do this. We have senior citizens, retired people. We have homeschooled children. There in the bottom left is a picture of my daughter taking observations. She would help me out. And it's just a great family-oriented science, technology, mathematics type program, a great STEM program. On to the next slide. So to make it easier on you, we have a couple different ways you can report your observation every day. So on the right is the CoCoRaHS website. That would be your daily entry point if you use the web. Very easy to fill out. We go through this in the full training and talk about what to report and where to report on that form. And then on the left is a picture of an app that's available for both your iPhone and Android phones. So you can just take your phone right out to the rain gauge, read it, dump it, enter your report, and you're done for the day. It's as simple as that. We also have something called a significant weather report. And if, let's say you had a big thunderstorm move through in the early afternoon, it dumped 3 or 4 inches of rain, you went out and read your rain gauge, you could submit that sort of supplemental report through CoCoRaHS, through the app or through the website. And when you do that, the report comes right into the National Weather Service office immediately. We have a little alarm that pops up on our computer screens, and we can see your report instantaneously within a minute or two of you submitting it. That has led us, in some cases, to actually issue flood warnings, where we've been watching a storm on radar. Radar estimates a certain amount of rainfall, but to get that ground truth, that actual observation, that then puts us over the edge and leads us to issue a warning in some cases. So again, you have a direct input into protection of life and property, and there's not too many other volunteer citizen science programs where you can do that. So on to the next slide. This is sort of the big picture of the CoCoRaHS website. And again, this is where you would start out every day if you're using the website to enter your report. And even if you don't participate in CoCoRaHS, I always recommend people just go to the website and look at where rain and snow is falling. If you're curious how much snow fell or how much rain fell, you can still use this website. It's free data for everyone. If you're an educator or a teacher or no teachers, you can go in here. There's even lesson plans that you can download. There's 4-H plans we've designed, so you can get involved with CoCoRaHS. I know in Indiana, you know, that's part of the weather curriculum for 4-H. Is we built CoCoRaHS into that as a project. So you'll just see lots of data there. You see a lot of blues and greens on that map of the United States. Those are all individual reports of precipitation on the particular day that this screen capture was made. So in addition, there's also links to training. If you can't attend the May 7th training we're going to give virtually, that's okay. You can still sign up on this website. You can still go through the training. There's PDFs, PowerPoints, and some really great animated videos that we actually use in our training that really help explain how to take observations. And then the CoCoRaHS people are all about weather education. So they have some great weather webinars. They bring in some guest speakers, some very famous weather people that just do 30 to 45-minute webinars with question and answers afterwards. So just a great overall program. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see a close-up of that map of the United States and all those precipitation reports that are color-coded. So on this particular day, there was almost 11,000 observations taken across the country. And I want to point out, you see some, like down in Florida and Texas and out along the West Coast, you see a lot of grays. Those are reports of 0 precipitation. We want our observers to report every day no matter what. If it doesn't rain for a week, we want you to report 0 every day. And the reason for that is it's very easy then when we go back and look at the data, especially for research, that we know you did not have precipitation on that day. If you don't report zeros and you go a week without observations, then we're unsure if it rained or not at your site. And so we tend to kind of throw those observations out for the research purpose. Even though it may have been no rainfall and perfectly good period of record for that station, we just want that 0. It's very important. And we're going to talk about how that actually helps us track the development of drought across the country. So a lot of good information there, but if you go ahead and click on Indiana, and we'll go to the next slide, you'll see a nice picture of the state. So suddenly it goes from looking like Indiana had all these observations and was just packed full of them to now you see it's kind of spread out. You see a lot of empty areas. And that's what we're doing, is we're trying to fill in as many of those gaps where there's no dots as possible. We want this map just to be as full and as dense as dots as possible. And that really lets us see these sort of mesoscale and microscale things that go on with storms and even in the winter with snowfall events as they develop. So you can just continue to drill down, and if you were to click on, let's say, Marion County, and we go to the next slide, now you're really seeing the actual observation. So those dots now turn into numbers, and you can see across the county how much precipitation fell and was reported by observers. So we really want to see, like up there in the northern part of the county, you can see it's almost difficult to read because there's several observers clustered together. That's actually what we want to see. That's a good problem to have. We have other ways we can look at this data other than just on a map, but we want to get as many observers as possible across all these counties so we can track these interesting phenomena that goes on with precipitation. And going on to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit now about how the data collected by our volunteers is used during major weather events. And as I've already mentioned, scientists, we do research on this. I myself am doing a extreme precipitation project for Indiana, and I am using some of the CoCoRaHS data. Unfortunately, I'm looking back 100 years, so the CoCoRaHS is only a snapshot of that time, but it still provides us with valuable information and data across the state. So there's a couple pictures there of some big snowfall events that occurred across the state and CoCoRaHS observers. Again, the data was submitted to FEMA, and a couple counties actually got disaster assistance because they had record snowfall, and that's what FEMA looks for. So if we can get observers to do this for years and years at a time, then their records become valuable. And one neat thing After you do this for a period of about 5 to 8 years, they actually create what's called a set of normals for your site. That would be typically how much precipitation you would expect each day. And that's pretty significant. That means you have a long enough period of record where statistically we can determine how much normal precipitation you would expect on a daily and monthly basis. So to be able to say, hey, I've got normals for my site, if you're a statistical weather geek, that's pretty cool, like myself. So on the right is just some pictures from the February 2018 extreme rainfall event that happened across much of the state. That was a February event where we had almost 8 inches of rainfall occur in 3 days. And we actually had a CoCoRaHS observer over in Stark County measured almost 8 inches, and they were the highest in the state. So if it wasn't for that CoCoRaHS observer, we wouldn't have been able to really get a handle on how much rain actually fell during that event. And we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, again, my computer's slow, I apologize. So now we want to talk about a couple examples of how CoCoRaHS observers helped during extreme events across the state. So the drought of 2012 was very significant. Many of you, I'm sure, remember that. And what we have here on the left, you see a picture of what's called an evapotranspiration gauge. This is another part of CoCoRaHS. This is primarily for the state ag entities, the National Weather Service. We're the ones primarily doing evapotranspiration. I think we do have a few observers doing that, but these gauges are pretty expensive, and we don't need as many evapotranspiration gauges as we do rain gauges. But essentially, they are sitting there, they're full of water, and they evaporate each day. And we go out and take a measurement in the morning when we take our precipitation measurement, and we see how much moisture evaporated out of these gauges. And then we combine that with how much precipitation fell, which we collect in the CoCoRaHS rain gauge, which you see on the right there, which is a 4-inch diameter rain gauge. And then we get a difference between the two, and that's called a water balance. So we get a daily water balance. Did we evaporate more, or did we gain more in precipitation? So for this drought of 2012, this is a chart that you would get with your station once you get it open. And you see that little green sort of dotted line that goes from the top left down to the right. What that is signifying is that every day we were evaporating more than we were gaining in precipitation. And that red shaded area is the deficit that was growing for precipitation. So this is where we can actually use CoCoRaHS to start seeing trends in the development of dry areas and potentially drought. And we're using this to study and learn more about early onset of drought. So by July of 2012 there, we had a negative water balance of almost 8 inches, meaning we evaporated more than 8 inches than we gained in precipitation to get that, what would be a zero net balance. And that persisted all the way into October of 2012. So without these CoCoRaHS observations of evapotranspiration and precipitation, we would have never been able to document this drought to this extent. One thing I do want to mention here with the rain gauge there on the right before I forget, these gauges, they do cost about $30, but they are heavy duty. I still own the original gauge I started with back in 2006. It's got a little bit of duct tape on it, but they are heavy duty. These are not your typical rain gauges you're going to find in the hardware store. They'll hold up to 11 inches of precipitation. And we want all of our CoCoRaHS observers using the exact same gauges. So this is what you would be required to buy if you've got a Davis automated system and think, oh, I'll just use that. No, we don't want you to do that. You can make comparisons, but we want everybody to use these gauges so we're comparing apples to apples. If you go on the CoCoRaHS website on the right-hand side, there's a couple vendors listed, and one's called weatheryourway.com. And they usually give a discount to CoCoRaHS observers and have a lot of other instruments available that you can use in CoCoRaHS. So that's where you would get one of your gauges, and that's what it would look like there on the right. So we'll go on to the next slide. And this is a picture of how the Northern Indiana National Weather Service Office actually used the CoCoRaHS data back in 2012 to create a 3-month map of rainfall across our area. And you can see basically anywhere from 2 to 6 inches of rain. But because of these CoCoRaHS observations, we could really narrow down to the areas that were not seeing the rainfall and those that were at least getting a decent amount. Now keep in mind, typical monthly rainfall in the summer is around 3.5 to 4.5 inches across the state per month. So for this 3-month period, we really normally should see close to 12 inches of rainfall. So it was an extremely dry period as seen here by the CoCoRaHS observations. On to the next slide. And again, I mentioned how we monitor drought. So every week we provide input across the state to the National Drought Monitor. And this is a great website to check out if you haven't already, droughtmonitor.unl.edu. And every week they take that information from each state and they put together an outlook of how extreme the drought is. So again, CoCoRaHS observations of zeros continue to show where areas do not receive rainfall, and then that just is coupled with other information sources, and these maps then are created. So CoCoRaHS observers, even when no precipitation is falling, are having an impact in how things are being done on a national level. So check out this webpage and just know those reports of zeros are very important year-round. And on to the next slide. A couple pictures from the drought of 2012, some dried up lake beds, and there was also a problem with blue-green algae where there was a little bit of water left standing because of the lack of oxygen, the lack of movement of the water. This very deadly blue-green algae formed. And again, researchers and scientists could track this with the lack of rainfall by using CoCoRaHS observations. Now, during this drought, lake levels dropped between 2 and 5 feet. Reservoirs were anywhere from 10 to 15 feet below their normal summer pool. That led to a lot of economic impacts. People couldn't use the parks, couldn't use reservoirs, couldn't go boating. And again, you have to track that with data, and the CoCoRaHS data was very critical in tracking all of that. So if we go to the next slide now, we can look at sort of the other side of the spectrum, the flood of 2015. So 3 years after this massive drought, we go into a summer where we have massive flood from just an incredible amount of rainfall. So here's our water balance chart. And now you can see that green line's moving from the bottom left to the top right, and we actually have a blue shaded area. So this is a precipitation surplus, and by September of 2015, our water balance was almost 13 inches above the balance mark. So just an incredible flip in just 3 years. And again, because of CoCoRaHS, you can see how you can track this very nicely. And that excess water balance continued on into the winter season during this year. So if we go to the next slide, this is another way you can look at the CoCoRaHS data. You can look at it in table format. This is basically an online spreadsheet, so you can put in your time period, put in a specific county or just the state, which is what I did for this, and you can see the actual monthly precipitation report. So the big winner in June 2015 was our observer just outside of Rensselaer with over 18 inches of precipitation. And now remember back to the drought over a 3-month period, that area only had maybe 5 inches of precipitation. So just an incredible extreme that we can track using this data. And we'll go on to the next slide. Just another way that the CoCoRaHS data then is used for mapping. On the National Weather Service websites, we have this precipitation mapping program. You can put in your time period, and you can see where you're above normal, below normal, and how much of a percent of normal you are. So for June of 2015, 12 to 15 inches above normal over several parts of the state, and that equaled 300 to 400% of normal precipitation. So for those of you that remember that summer, all the reservoirs were filled to capacity. and just a lot of flooding through the entire month. And again, lakes and reservoirs and parks couldn't be used, but in this case, because they were all flooded and underwater. So a huge economic impact that again is tracked because of CoCoRaHS data. So on to the next map, we just showed July of 2015, and just again how that wet summer continued. Not quite as wet as June, but still 4 to 8 inches above normal. And when you combine that amount of above normal with the previous month, it just compounds the problem. And we continue to track this data. So looking at the next slide, this is a picture of the Mississinawa Reservoir. That is Highway 13 there, bridge across the reservoir. Many of you have probably driven across that. That's what it should look like in the middle of summer at normal summer pool. If we go to the next slide, this is basically the same angle, looking at the same bridge, and just an incredible record 40 feet above normal summer pool. So this reservoir was at its max capacity, but it functioned just like it was supposed to. The water was let out slowly. There was only minor flooding downstream, and that's what it was designed for. It was to hold water back, but unfortunately, the park and the reservoir couldn't be used, and there was quite a bit of damage during that entire summer. So the unfortunate impacts of what can happen, but now we have a real good gauge of, when we see these kind of wet summers developing, we know what's going to happen because we can track and study the data. And then the next slide just again shows some more pictures from what happened that summer with the heavy rains. And this water stayed high on a lot of the lakes up north, well into the early fall season before they finally got back to near normal. And the next slide then, we just kind of want to start wrapping up here by saying we want to establish this partnership, as I mentioned earlier, but we want you to be a part of it. We need volunteers, we need citizen science to combine with CoCoRaHS to give us quality, dense network of precipitation observations that, we can track everyday rain, but we really want to track and understand and study these extreme rainfall events. This CoCoRaHS just helps us monitor these drought conditions, and it gives us a better understanding of these trends, as well as the ecological impacts that we're seeing from both heavy rain and a lack of rain across the state. And then finally, improve preparedness and mitigation. So again, we've seen what certain rainfall will do, what a lack of rainfall will do, and we can now prepare and try to mitigate those. We can maybe improve our levee system. We can maybe get rid of structures that floods typically and move them to higher ground and things like that. But you have to have that good source of data to be able to do that. Moving on to the next slide. So with this, with your help, we're really moving towards what the Weather Service calls a weather-ready nation. And it's this partnership to make everyone ready, responsive, and resilient to increasing extreme weather threats. So on to the next slide. This program is called a Weather Ready Nation Ambassador Program. So I want to put a plug in for this real quick. By participating in CoCoRaHS, you may be part of an organization, a service club, or a business that takes weather safety seriously, and you're promoting weather safety, you're doing things to make the country more resilient. And if you're doing that, we want to recognize you. So by becoming a Weather Ready Nation Ambassador, we're just recognizing you and saying thanks and creating a partnership with your organization to continue to educate people and prepare for natural disasters. And the next slide actually shows a website where you can go to sign up to become a Weather Ready Nation Ambassador. It doesn't even take 5 minutes to fill out the form and submit it. But you're just saying that you're going to continue to promote the Weather Ready Nation message. You're going to collaborate with NOAA and the Weather Service just by being on this call. This is part of collaboration. You're taking a step forward to help us study weather. Share success stories. Maybe there's an unfortunate tornado or a severe thunderstorm, and you got people to safety at your business because you had a safety plan. We want to know about that. We want to know that what we're teaching is working. and then just be an example by promoting weather safety and things like that. So we have well over 10,000 ambassadors across the country now, and this program is growing very quickly. And again, it's just a way to say thank you to you for everything you've done. And then we'll just move on to the last slide here and summarize everything. You know, today was just an information session. We will do the training on May 7th. That'll probably take about an hour to go through, where we'll talk about how to measure precipitation, how to measure snowfall. There's actual scientific ways of doing it to do it properly. And we're just trying to bridge that data gap between the unknown and the known through data. So Thursday, May 7th, mark your calendars, 1 p.m. and then again at 6 p.m. Again, you only have to attend one of those. It will just be a repeat. And if you can't make those sessions, that's okay. You can still go ahead and sign up today on the CoCoRaHS website. We did hear that the site might have been down for a little bit, but on the top left of the website is a join CoCoRaHS link, and you just fill that out with your name, address, contact information, and then submit it. And within usually a day or two, you will get a welcome email and more information, and you can sign up your account. And there's training on that website on the left-hand menu, and you can take that training if you don't want to wait till May 7th, and you can get started right away as soon as you get a rain gauge. So again, I'm Sam Lashley with the National Weather Service, Beth Hall with the State Climate Office, State Climatologist, and then Hans with Purdue Extension. We can all answer any questions and help you get started and help you promote CoCoRaHS. We really appreciate you being here today. And with that, I will be quiet and take any questions that you might have.
Okay, I did want to comment on one thing in the chat box. One individual found that there were only 3 reports in Lake County, and I responded that there are more individuals, more observers in Lake County, but they may not have been able to get their observation in with enough time to make the website for the day. That could be the case. It could be that we just need more observers in Lake County. So I didn't want to leave that option out of there. I know in Posey County, where I am, we have maybe a dozen observers, but only 2, maybe 3 that really report on a regular basis. So we definitely need more observers.
Absolutely, and that's a great point. And a lot of times some people take their observations at 8 or 9 and then they forget to enter them, and they'll enter them later in the day, and that's okay. But like Hans said, you won't make the maps then. You usually have to have your report in by 10 a.m. to make it onto that map. But don't look at the map and say, oh, there's plenty of observers in my area, so I don't need to do this. We want as many observers as possible to have that dense network. I've got a couple people who are neighbors doing it, and they kind of go back and forth and have some just good camaraderie comparing who got the most rainfall, and their gauges are literally about 50 yards apart. So, you know, have fun with the program. It's a family-oriented program, and we want you to enjoy and have fun doing this.
So I have a question. And of course, your maps don't show the demographics of who the observers are, but I'm wondering if you have any way that you reach out to groups such as homeowners associations in areas where maybe one person wouldn't be able to do it every day, but it could be a group project in a homeowners association. Seems like that would be kind of doable, maybe more reliable if people took turns, and it could be a project for their community. Do you have a way that you recommend people do that, or a way of reaching out for that? Or if we had that idea, are we just on our own to recruit and figure out how it would work?
That's a great idea. We haven't reached out to homeowners associations. We have reached out to lake associations, and we've had a few of those sign up, but it ends up they don't do it as a group. They end up individually. We have several from the lake association sign up around the lake. So there's no good way I can think of to contact those people other than getting the word out. But that's a great idea and a great group. I know, having just been looking at several housing additions for a new house for my relocation, a lot of places they're building little parks now. So that would be a great place to just put the gauge up. There's always the problem with vandalism, and we have run into that in a few cases, but that's usually a very small issue and not usually the norm. But thanks for that. If you have any ideas of how to contact groups like that, or at least get the word out, we're all open to that.
Okay, I think there's an association of homeowners associations, at least here in Indianapolis where I live in. I could find out how to contact them just from my end, because I think that my organization, my homeowners association, there would be some people that might be interested in doing it. We'd have to take your training as a group, I suppose. And then there's always issues in homeowners, things with, irrigation of lawns, and that probably would not be desirable, but we could find the right space. We just would need people who would do it every single day.
And you want to talk a little bit about multi-day reports too, for when people can't do it every day?
Sure. So, like I said, we ideally want everybody to report on a daily basis, but we know that's not going to happen. Life gets in the way. You go on vacation, and while we strongly recommend you don't go on vacation, we're not going to, forbid you. No, I'm just joking. But we have what's called a multi-day report. So let's say you take your observation on Monday, and then you go away for a week on vacation, and you call Hans, Beth, and I and invite us to go with you to the Bahamas or wherever. And then we get back the following Monday. So you've been away 7 or 8 days. There is what's called a multi-day precipitation link on the webpage. So rather than go where you would normally enter your daily report, you just go to this multi-day, you put in the date of your last observation, the day that you're now entering, and then whatever was in your gauge while you were away. So what that does, it lets us track at least how much precipitation fell in that period, but it stores it in a different location so we know it's different from the daily observations. So when we go back and study these data, then we're not getting multi-days and the single days mixed up, and we continue to compare apples to apples. So again, this program is wide open. We have people that go away for the winter to Florida and come back and start taking their observations when they come back. Their site just sits there with no observations while they're gone. Perfectly fine. We'd rather get observations for half the year than just have you stop doing it thinking it's worthless. We even have people that have a second gauge in Florida, and they'll do their observations down there and report through their other station, and then they come back to Indiana or report up here through their Indiana ID. So very flexible. And if you have any questions about that or worried about, not getting an observation in, just send us an email, and we'll be happy to talk with you and ease your concerns. We just want people taking observations when they can, and even in a safe environment. We have several people that email us, and they're all apologetic because there was an ice storm and they were afraid to go out to their gauge and take a measurement. Perfectly understandable. We want you to be safe and comfortable, and don't worry about that. It's very easygoing, laid-back program.
Very quickly, we've got a couple of things in the chat. Number one, Austin would also like to go on vacation. And number two, will the link to the May 7th trainings be made available on the CoCoRaHS website or another website that might be visited?
Yeah, so my hope is the best recording of today or yesterday's webinar that you've seen will go on the Indiana State Climate Office's website. And then if you do go to CoCoRaHS.org, there is a section just for states. And if you go to the Indiana state page for CoCoRaHS, we'll post the links there. In addition to the May 7th training sessions, those will also be there. And I know we promoted today's webinar through the Indiana Master Gardeners and Master Naturalist program. So I will email my contacts there to hopefully have that information disseminated to that group. I don't know how many of you came from that promotion or if you just heard word of mouth, but we'll try and get those emails through those two ways.
And I forgot to mention, I did want to say this, with Master Naturalists and Master Gardeners programs, I've been told that participating in CoCoRaHS and taking your observation counts towards your annual volunteer hours. So if that's still the case, that's just another incentive for being an observer.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, Patty,
Yes,
go ahead.
go ahead.
Okay, to order the rain gauge, how do you go about that? Do you go to the CoCoRaHS or do you go to the Indiana State Climate Office?
The CoCoRaHS website has a link. I have a slide up now. So on the home page, down on the right-hand column, there's a link to Weather Your Way, which is just a mom pop business. It's one woman who kind of branched off and decided to do stuff like this. So she's not in it for the profits. Profits don't go to CoCoRaHS, but she is well aware of CoCoRaHS and offers a lot of the equipment there. And there's probably other sites as well. I just know that Weather Your Way, you know what you're getting. You're getting the reliable gauge.
So then the second question, or the second observation, and I like the idea with Mary having a area do the rain or do this gathering of information on weather, because Terre Haute has ISU Community Garden, and I can then get my community garden members to participate in this program by reading the gauge and reporting. So do we have to have just one reporter, or can we do it collectively?
So I know there's some groups that sign up and they aren't individuals, if you will. So it can be groups that participate in it. Because I know there's a time we put together a monthly newsletter to all of our observers, and that newsletter goes out to the email on file, if you will, with the account. But I was told that that isn't always the person who's doing the observing. That just might be the representative person. So I do know that there are other groups out there that could do it. For example, weather service offices, and Sam, maybe you guys do it where you have your CoCo gauge, but it's not one person all the time. They share that responsibility.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I love the community garden idea. That's a fantastic idea. And Beth's exactly right. You just have to have one person who would sort of be the prime contact person with their email address or whatever. But as long as everybody has the username and password for the website or the app, then yeah, whoever takes the observation just logs in that morning and enters the report, and we get the data. So great idea. Thank you. That's a really, really good group. I don't know how we contact them all around, but you're seeing more and more of those community gardens. So that'd be perfect.
Also, we'll be promoting CoCoRaHS in general and the training sessions. I'll do that through the State Climate Office's social media. I think Sam might do some promotions too through the Weather Service. So I encourage everyone, if you are on social media, to look us up through Facebook or Twitter so that you might get some announcements there. Certainly check out the Indiana State Climate Office's website for not only this information, but just other interesting climate tools across the state. Again, think about the Weather Ready Nation, looking to learn more about that and get involved. Sam, do you have any final thoughts?
I'd just like to thank everybody for being on today and for the great suggestions, and I hope you come back for the training.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Larry,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Okay, I'd like to be one of the volunteers for this program.
Okay. So the question is, how would you become a volunteer?
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay, so what you would want to do is just go to the CoCoRaHS website, and at the top left side of the web page is just a button that says Join CoCoRaHS. And click on that. You'll be asked some questions, your address, contact information, and submit. And then within usually a day or two, you will get an email response, a welcome letter, and you will be ready to join. Then you just really need to take the training. Now, you don't have to have the in-person or, in this case, the virtual training. You can go through the information on the website. Again, on the left-hand menu under, there's a link for training, and there's videos you can watch. There's PowerPoint, PDF shows you can go through. So it's really up to your comfort level then. If you're comfortable after going through that and you're ready to go, you get your gauge, you install it, and you start taking your observations. If you want to wait and do the training, that's what we're going to do on May 7th. And again, we'll cover more of that in depth of how to get signed up in that training as well. But anyone that's on this call today, feel free to go to that website and get signed up, get your site, get your gauge ordered. And then when we do have that training on May 7th, you'll be ready to go and taking observations.
Can you still?
When is that training going to be? What time of day?
We currently have 2 sessions set up, one for 1 p.m. in the afternoon and then another session at 6 p.m. They're identical sessions, so you only have to attend one. And I believe Beth and Hans will be sending out the information. That will be a, I think it's a WebEx, correct, Hans? Training?
Correct. Yes, it's a WebEx. There is a link that you'll have to copy and paste that is in the chat box. We did have a question whether the training is virtual. If you go to the website and attempt the training, you will be watching videos. And if you join us on WebEx, then you would be in a virtual setting like this.
And our hope, once we get out of this situation we've all been in and we can get out and have meetings again, we do plan on having live training sessions around the state. Ideally, we'd like to have 6 or 8, maybe a year, anywhere from northern Indiana to central Indiana to southern Indiana. A lot of the Weather Service offices actually give that training, but we're going to be working with Beth to see if we can come up with a more standard schedule every year and spread those out and get as many people signed up into actual live training as possible.
I'll also add that I think I've put up on the presentation the first slide of the website. So that's where you guys can see where you can join and get the videos, but I get a lot of questions about where do I get the rain gauge? And I think you could buy them on Amazon, but from that home web page near on the right-hand side further down, there's a company called Weather Your Way that works directly with CoCoRaHS. It's an independent company, but they know the CoCoRaHS people, so I believe they do try to provide some additional services. And when you get your rain gauge from Weather Your Way, it will actually send you a pamphlet about CoCoRaHS, and they're a great company to work with to get any of the equipment that you might want to use.
Yeah, and let me just interject there. There's been some problems with some of the gauges on Amazon. Some of them aren't actually, they claim to be CoCoRaHS, but they're not actually certified to do it. So I would stick with one of the companies there on the CoCoRaHS website on the right-hand side. But that's exactly right. Weather Your Way, they usually give a little bit of a discount to CoCoRaHS observers. And they also have some other instrumentation if you're looking for a ruler. I think they have some of those there. We'll talk in the training about a snow swatter. I don't want to give that away what that is here. That's a little tease for the training, but they do sell snow swatters there. So that's your little enticement to come back for the training.
Question in the chat, is that weatheryourway.com or .org?
.com.
.com.
on a suggestion, I guess, and I haven't signed anybody up for a few years, but on when you're doing the location, make sure you use the right decimals instead of degrees, I think, on your coordinates. I'm not sure if that's still how you do that or not. But.
And you'd be referring to the GPS location of your gauge.
Correct, yeah.
That is Brian Overstreet speaking, a county coordinator for Jasper County, Indiana, and he may have been the observer that Sam referenced during his presentation.
But if you use the degrees versus the decimal, you'll be about 25 miles southeast of where you really are if you're not careful. I learned the hard way.
Excellent point.
That's a great point, Brian. And I think they've got it now where if you just put in your street address, if you don't want to worry about lat long, then it will compute that for you, but you can do either.
Okay, I haven't signed anybody up for a couple of years, so there for a while I got several, but I haven't walked anybody through it lately.
Yeah, I do believe that you just enter in your street address, your mailing address type idea, and the CoCoRaHS site will figure that out.
So Brian, was that your 18.06 inches?
No, that was, I can't remember which number that one was, but no, I'm JS1 and JS56, so it was one of the others. But.
Okay. Yeah, that was 32.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who that one is. I think I'd have to look at it, but I think it was was it south of town? I think there's one, I think I can't remember.
Southeast.
Okay, yeah, I think that was the one that's just south of the old St. Joe campus. Or whatever it is now.
Are there any other questions that folks have? It seems kind of quiet. So I think I was going to just wrap up, but I think I've already said it, is to try and like or follow, if you're on the Facebooks or the Twitters, our different organizational pages. So the Indiana State Climate Office or National Weather Service, Indianapolis, because not only will these announcements be there, but we like to think we post other interesting things. The training webinars will be held on May 7th. And Hans has put the links for that up in the chat box. So if you have your chat box open and just don't want to do a quick copy and paste into something, then you can register for that. They are identical, so you don't have to attend both of them. And we also do plan to record the best one of the two, if you will, and post that both on the State Climate Office's website and the Indiana page within the CoCoRaHS website. Otherwise, yeah, I really appreciate all of you that have called in. We got a great number for an evening webinar. And between now and May 7th, if you have any questions, I'll see if I can put up that final slide. So you have our email addresses. Feel free to reach out to us. Also, your extension agent, if you work with them at all, they probably know who to get you in touch with. And help spread the word for us. I mean, if you are in a situation where you can't be a CoCoRaHS observer, but you know somebody who is, this is great for master gardeners, master naturalists, just plain weather enthusiasts. And so really be great if you're willing to join and get the gauge. And then on May 7th, join us for the training session. With that, Hans and Sam, do you have any closing comments?
I just want to say thanks to everybody for joining us tonight, and I hope I didn't stutter through everything too much. That was a new experience for me, but thanks for joining us, and please spread the word.
And I just thanked everyone in the chat, and we'll leave it at that.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Have a good evening.